All right, what is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here once again, and I want to welcome you to the Nebula Music Podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, this is a show where we talk to some of today's most inspiring and creative people of the music industry, whether they're entrepreneurs, artists, or just doing something really fucking cool in the music industry. We have them on the show so we can get a chance to pick their brain and see what drives their passion. Today is no exception. I do say that quite a bit, but I always get excited because I get a chance to talk to some really dope people. And today is no exception to that because I have somebody who's incredibly talented, making incredibly unique music that's refreshing for, in this day and age that we're living in. And so I am beyond stoked to pick his brain a little bit. I have Mr. DES ROCS joining me today. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm excited because, all things considered, I'm, safe and I'm having fun and doing my thing. I'm wondering, and this is something that I've asked a lot of my guests lately, just because I think it's important for everyone, in the country and stuff. I'm wondering how you've been dealing with the whole lockdown / pandemic thing. I know we've been in this for about 8-9 months or something, and the music industry has been very affected by it. So I'm wondering, how are you doing? Is everything okay on your end? I know that you're in New York, so how's everything? You cool?
I'm doing well. I'm healthy, and I think that's the most important thing you could ask for today.
Yeah.
And that's really nice at the end of the day, And I also think that, the times make the man, so you got to just take the hand that we're dealt and just make some incredible art and do everything you can do that's not playing shows in front of actual people.
Yeah, that's actually a well said phrase. I think that's a good way to look at it. Very concise. I know that you're out in New York and you're from Queens, right?
I'm from Long Island, New York, and have lived a lot of my life throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan. And right now I'm coming to you from Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
I love it. How is the whole situation in New York right now? Because at least here in Los Angeles, in terms of music, everything is closed. There really isn't anything happening. There aren't really any pop-up shows. I've heard rumors that there are some pop-up shows happening in New York, but at least out here in Los Angeles, everything is still pretty much closed and digital, I guess you can say it. Everything's kind of being streamed. There are some drive-in things that are they're starting to happen, but I'm not so sure what's going on in New York.
Yeah, everything is still closed. New York is a city that's really defined by how close total strangers are to each other. So a lot of the vibe of the city has changed tremendously over the last few months, not permanently in any way, in my opinion. But yeah, the city is still going strong. People who are like, New York is dead, this and that is just so ridiculous. Like, New Yorkers adapt and we don't mess around. Like, when stuff goes down, like, we all do what we got to do and we all band together. So New York is strong and New York is doing well.
Yeah, I love that. You sound exactly like my buddy, and I'm totally spacing out on his name, but he plays bass for Charlie Puth, and he lived in Brooklyn for a very long time, and he had a very similar story, and he always expressed how in New York there is this sort of camaraderie, especially amongst artists and musicians. There is this very much like everyone's kind of a soldier. It's a very tough city to make it in, and it's a very tough city to stand out in, and so you kind of have to work really, really hard to do that. But a lot of the people that I've talked to, they aren't from New York. They usually move to New York at some point, whether early in their life or whatever. You are from there, which is kind of unique in my perspective. I'm wondering, is that attitude, I guess you can say, is that something that everybody picks up on, or is there some sort of variance, I guess? Because it does seem, and again, I'm generalizing here, I don't want to generalize, but everyone that I've ever interacted with from New York has that very same vibe, and it's cool and I love it. But I'm wondering, is that something that you learn from early on, or is it taught by something else? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
I've always definitely embodied, I think, a lot of the sort of stereotypical traits that people associate with New York City. It also really depends on where exactly you're from. I feel like where I grew up in Nassau County has a very different mindset from people who grew up in Queens, and people who grew up in Brooklyn, and people who grew up in Manhattan for real. It's like there's kind of shades of this New York spectrum. And for me, I'm someone who grew up in the shadow of New York City, taking the train 30 minutes into Manhattan on the weekends, and always wanting to live and breathe something outside of exactly where I lived. And I think that creates a really unique kind of person. You got to be you have to kind of like be imbued with a certain sense of determination in all things and a sense of hustle. And I think that really defines everything about me.
Yeah, and I can definitely pick that. I can pick up on that just by talking to you for a couple of minutes and reading into some of the things that you've achieved. I mean, it's kind of crazy, and we're gonna get into it. So I kind of want to take a couple minutes and pass it on to you, if that's okay. I want to know a little bit about how you got started with music, um, and then maybe we'll just take it from there. I mean, whichever way you want to explain it. I know that sometimes how we get started in music can be broad and very long, but I just want to get a little tidbit of how it is that you got started with music, and then kind of where you're at, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think the most important and initial phase is just becoming cognizant of songs at a very young age and just love listening to the radio in my parents' car and wanting to sing and just being a very like charismatic, outgoing, kind of like crazy little kid. I always wanted to just do stuff, and I had a very creative drive that was really evident from a super, super, super young age. And I wanted to play all the instruments, but I also wanted to like be in the bands, and I wanted to travel and do all the things. So it was a real perfect storm for me, where I've always had a really strong sense of what I wanted to do musically from a super young age, and started playing in bands when I was around 13, 14, and would just play to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Like I played hundreds and hundreds of rec centers and VFW halls and totally empty bars and clubs all across this country, driving around all day for many, many
Damn.
years. And it really was a formative initiation into music. It was like pledging the music industry.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's always just been such an integral part of my DNA. And people always ask, like, yeah, how'd you get started in music? And it's like, well, I never really started, and I don't think I'll ever really stop, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I do feel like there are a lot of us musicians. I'm a drummer myself,
Awesome.
and there is like this thing where I feel like it's just become like a popular thing to just try and pinpoint that moment that you were like, oh yeah, music is my thing. And for a lot of us, I think that there are those moments that we identify as a pivotal switch, you know, like where we just became very much aware that we liked this art form. But I do feel like what you're saying has a lot of truth in it. I think many of us were born with this, I don't know how you would describe it. I guess we just liked music so much that we were always around it to some extent. And then we became cognizant that that's what we were doing. But you were very much, from a young age, you were kind of in it, right? You were doing the touring thing. You were playing a lot of places. How young were you when you started kind of like traveling around and playing at bars well, I guess you couldn't be younger than 21, I guess. But, you know, you get what I'm saying. When you were playing around in all the places, how young were you when you started doing
I was
that?
about 14 years old, and I was way younger than 21. I was playing bars. CBGBs when I was 14 years old, like right before it closed. And I had to, like, anytime I played any of these bars in the city, I would have to leave the second my set ended. So they would let me on stage, like some arbitrary rule they just kind of made up about how much a 14-year-old could be in a bar. And I would go there and I'd play my set, and I'd pack my stuff up, and I'd get kicked out. And and going to the original point on, you know, like when you got started and when you discovered music. For me, it's like asking somebody, you know, when did you become you? And you're like, well, I've always been me, and I think I always will be me. But you know, you kind of can try to ascribe like specific moments or dates to formative personality traits. But yeah, it's just always been who I am.
Yeah. Do you like that? I don't know how you would describe it, but there is this sort of attitude that I get when it comes to playing music. And I'm going to try and elaborate a little bit because I don't want to generalize, but I do feel like in my position, I get a chance to talk to so many different people, all different walks of life. And there are certain types of people that enjoy that. I don't know how to describe it. I guess nitty gritty, just kind of getting up and playing no matter where you're at. You just want to play. There is a difference. There are people who would much rather, they kind of build themselves up to be more professional in a sense, but there are those that just want to play, and becoming professional is kind of part of it. I'm wondering for you, it sounds like you've always had that as a young age, that you just wanted to play and it didn't matter where. But I'm wondering, is that true for you, or do you feel like you're somewhat different?
Yeah, no, I love to play. Um, it's what I really feel like I was put on this earth to do, is to play shows and sing the songs to actual people I get to write. And yeah, I think I'm definitely of that ilk without a doubt.
Yeah. And so when it comes to your music that you're currently playing now, I'd like to kind of, I mean, I could describe it. I've read up on it and I've listened to a lot of your tracks. And I actually even saw one of your songs in one of the trailers for this game that I absolutely love because I'm a huge gamer.
Oh,
And, you know, your song was on Borderlands 3, I think it was. But before we even get into all that, I want to kind of hear it from you. Like, how would you describe your music that you're currently playing right now?
man, it's always such a tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, I always have this like, this conflict where I'm like, if you can describe it, like it's not worth doing. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
But you can definitely take a
Yeah.
shot. Definitely take a shot at it. And for me, it's just, I just want it to be perceived as music that is extraordinarily personal, extraordinarily emotional, and true and honest, and that will move you on some level as a human being. And I think that can mean many different things. So, it's also important to me that the music is just constantly evolving. I know the DES ROCS song from 2 years ago when I first started to now sound nothing alike, but they're all kind of under this one creative umbrella that is my vibe and my soul.
Hmm. I'm wondering why you just said that you feel like when you describe or you try to like kind of pinpoint the genre, and I think I know why you're saying it, but I'm just curious. Why do you feel like that's not something you want to try and do? Because I know that you probably get asked this a lot, and you're right, and it's a very it's a cliche kind of question, you know. But I'm wondering like, what is it that, or at least why try to not classify it? I guess if that makes sense.
Well, I think classification really only exists as a mechanism of convenience. Like we as human beings and as music listeners love to put things into categories and boxes because it's easy and it's something that we can like wrap our brains around. But what I want to create is art, and art, I believe, defies some of those simpler categorizations, So for me, I'm always just trying to bend the rules that you can't describe it. Like I love blues music and I love blues-based music, but the blues is like a very restricted format musically,
Yeah.
So for me, it's always about how do we just take all these things that I like and how do I blend them up into one sort of less describable DES ROCS stew,
Hmm. That's actually a really good point. I'm wondering, well, here's the thing. I feel like the older I get and the more I learn about music as a whole, right, and all these genres and even stuff that I didn't grow up with, I'm learning that, and again, I'm generalizing, and I'm not somebody who knows enough to really like claim things, but at least I'm aware that almost every genre has its limitations in terms of like its format, the formula. I would argue that almost every genre has that. Even jazz, which I grew up playing, they have these sort of, I don't know how you would describe, but limitations in terms of how they're supposed to be done, I guess. And so I'm wondering, even though as musicians we are creating art and we're creating all these different things that we think of, somehow these genres always end up having rules. Why is that? Why do you feel like, because I feel like most artists start out like you, and I think a lot of them do end up staying true to that thought throughout their career. But then ultimately, you also get another half of people who end up creating these rules, following the rules, and the format kind of sort of becomes a thing. I'm not saying anyone sits there and makes it happen. It just kind of becomes a thing, you know? So I'm wondering, in your opinion, why do you feel like almost every genre has those limitations and rules that are just kind of created randomly, if that makes sense?
I don't know. I think, like, with regards to that whole concept, it's really like to each their own. If somebody
Yeah.
says, I'm a rock artist, and they sit down with a guitar and they say, well, I need to make a song that sounds like X, Y, and Z because I'm a rock artist, and that's great. Like, power to you. If that's your art, that's your art. But for me, I just really try not to think about those categorizations other than as like really fun palettes that I get to draw from. If something is, quote, industrial, like I love the beat of something that's industrial. If something is groovy, like and has a certain rhythm to it, and like taking from everything that's ever existed before me and getting to use it. Like that's such an exciting proposition to me, that all of music and all of art is at my disposal, waiting to be reinterpreted however I see fit and however I can, to use all those tools and colors on the palette to express my emotions, you know?
Yeah. Does that ever overwhelm you by any chance? Because sometimes, and again, I'm sort of speaking out of experience and also opinions that I've heard from other people, sometimes the vast amount of creativeness that you can use, you know, especially if you view it almost all kinds of genres, there's so many things that you can use. And while that's awesome, to some people that can be a little bit overwhelming if they don't have some sort of structure, if that makes sense. For you, has that ever overwhelmed you? Like the vast amount of musical knowledge and things that you can use to create your music. Do you ever stop to think about it, or you just kind of take whatever you need at any given time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. I think they're both equally overwhelming and inspiring. I think, you know, the fact that I can just make any noise in the world because of laptops is super, super exciting. And there's a lot of untraditional elements in DES ROCS records because of that. But at the same time, like my music making process, I try to keep it limited to an extent where it's like I'm pretty much using the same one or two guitars unless I really have a specific idea or guitar sound in mind that I don't have. I'm pretty much using the same few batch of pedals. But I am really inspired by things I don't know. And to have like an instrument that I don't know how to use, to have a piece of software that I don't know how to use is very creative for me, because I'm not using any sort of muscle memory. I'm just kind of like following the sounds and where they take me.
Yeah. So what's an example of that? Is that something that you did for this current batch of music that you're releasing or that you're working on? Was there a moment where you spent a good amount of time either learning an instrument or software, like you were mentioning, that you didn't know how to use and it made it into the EP or into some of the music that you're currently releasing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's everywhere. Like a lot of guitar pedals that I just didn't know how to use. There are guitar pedals. I mean, there's one on a song coming out called Pieces where there's like a really amazing sound on it. And it's because I plugged a guitar pedal into the wrong power for it. And the guitar pedal just started dying because I was destroying it electrically. And as it was dying, I was recording, and it just made a couple like really cool sounds with its last few dying breaths. And that kind of really became like a staple of one of these songs.
Interesting. I love those little accidents that happen. You know what I mean? Like there are so many times where when I produce music, you know, for me specifically, like I use a lot of digital things, like a lot of digital plugins and stuff. And there are so many times where during sound design, you just kind of tweak things. You're just moving knobs, even though you know what they do. Sometimes you can't really perceive what the sound is going to sound like. And then you come out with something very, very cool at the other end. And usually, I guess I would say like half the time, it makes it to the final cut. For you, how often does that happen though? Like how often do you just kind of, I'm not going to say fuck up because it's not a fuck up, you just kind of experiment. How often do you randomly stumble upon sounds and unique things that make it into the final product?
Oh, I would say like at least half of the records that make it out are just filled with happy accidents. Without a doubt. Like happy accidents are such an integral part of the creative process for me.
Yeah, I love that, dude. I love your personality. Here's one thing that I finding rather refreshing about who you are. You seem very down to earth, very mellow. You also seem, I mean, I could be wrong, but it's not, you seem very comfortable with being who you are. You know, you from a very young age, you're already very, very okay with the sound that you have, with the experimentation that you're doing. And I'm wondering, where does that come from, so to speak? I know that we talked about you being from New York and some of that hustling thing that you got to do and how hard it is sometimes. But again, speaking from experience, everybody's different. There are so many differences when it comes to musicians. And you are very much already kind of, I want to say, there. You know what I mean? Like you like the sound that you have and you know exactly what you're looking for. And you're also okay, I'm assuming, but you're also okay with not knowing what to get, and you know you're going to find it. That's at least what I'm assuming that you are. Am I close?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely an interesting observation because, like, I write a lot about identity, and it took me a very long time in my life to just be totally comfortable being me and coming to the
Mm.
realization that, like, your odds of success or reaching people as a musician, as an artist, are equal whether you're trying to do something that's not you or just being yourself. So you might as well just do you, you know? And
Yeah.
with that realization where things are just kind of like, it is what it is. I'm going to make my music, and if people like it, and it's meant to be, and if not, no, that really entails a certain sense of confidence that definitely took me a while to get. But then once you get it, there will be times where it gets tested, of course, with over the years. But like once you have it, it's just like the greatest gift I think any artist can receive. Just feeling comfortable being who you are and doing what you do and saying what you want to say. But yeah, I mean, like, I think, you might think I'm grounded in the sense of like, an interview at 2 p.m., but, a show is a very different story. And it's been a minute since there's been shows.
Yeah, that is true. Are you different when you're on stage?
Yeah, well, I always say that, like, this is the performance right here, and then on stage is the real me.
This is the well put together version of you. And
Yeah,
on stage, well, what are you like on stage then? Are you very energetic, jumping off the wall kind of thing?
yeah, I'm just kind of like one fluid stream of emotion and feelings, and I'm just totally in the moment, and the rest of the world just sort of melts away, and I feel very comfortable and very happy and very physical.
Yeah. Random question. Do you get any kind of anxiety when it comes to performance? Like, you know how the stereotypical ones are like pre-performance anxiety or like, performance anxiety when you're on there. Do you ever get nervous at all or not at all?
The only anxiety I have with regards to performances is waiting to go on. But I don't know if it's so much of an anxiety as it is an impatience. Like I just want to get started already, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that's like a type of anxiety, but like the second I show up at the venue at like 12 p.m. and I'm on stage at 10, I'm like, I want to play, I want to play, I want to play. That's what I think all day, So it's, maybe it's a sense of performance anxiety, or maybe it's just me kind of being like a golden retriever and just wanting to play a role as quickly as I can for as long as I can.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. Kind of backtracking just a couple seconds, I'm wondering how long did it take for you to feel comfortable with your identity in terms of music? And maybe it could be also in life, I don't know, but I know we were talking about how it was a bit of a hard work. You definitely worked at it and it took some time for you to get to where you're currently at. This is something that always fascinates me. I feel like everyone has a very different journey. Some people get there sooner, some people take a long time. Some people feel like they never get there, but you seem to have gotten there. And I'm wondering if you remember or even know like how long it took for you to get there and how that happened. Did you just work at it every day? Did you mentally tell yourself, "Hey, I'm going places, I'm getting there"? Like I don't know. I'm just wondering.
I think it's like similar to what we were talking about before, where it's like there's not one defining year of life or moment. It's just kind of this gradual sense of security that comes over playing lots of shows and being in many different bands and traveling the country. And, it just kind of sets in at a certain point, I think. I spent so much of my teenage years like being this odd man out at shows, playing these local
Hmm.
shows in Long Island and Queens and Brooklyn and Manhattan and feeling like I just didn't fit on the bill. I was kind of this musical black sheep, and everybody was either a hardcore band or an emo band. And I just kind of wanted to be all these different things at once. And that made it tough for people to like put me on shows because I was this like 15-year-old kid who like, yeah, I loved certain elements of hardcore music and metal music. And I loved certain elements of emo music. And I also love Bruce Springsteen. And I also love Queen. And I love the Talking Heads. And I love Roy Orbison and Elvis Presley and all these other artists. And they all sort of flowed and mixed around into one unique thing that really stuck out. And I wasn't good back then. Like I didn't know what I was doing, but goddamn, I was just trying to do me. And I think doing you, like at the end of the day, is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah. And that's the context right there that I find so fascinating because, as you say it, it makes sense, right? And I feel like I feel cliche saying it because almost every other person out there says something similar to what you're saying. But to say it and to live it is a completely different thing. And I'm willing to argue that there aren't many people, at least that I'm aware of in the music industry, that do it well and that were very aware that they needed to do themselves. Not like that, but that they needed to be themselves. And again, this kid, 15-year-old kid, you know, amongst lots of different genres, but you wanted to be your own thing. It is so interesting that you always knew that you knew that you kind of had to be you, but you also knew that you just didn't care to be put in a box. That's hard, dude. That's hard to do as an adult and especially as a teenager. That's why I'm wondering, like, where did that come from? Because it's so interesting that you have that.
Well, you know what? I was also like gifted with this unique inability to be like those other people, even if I wanted to. You know, like I couldn't sing with a voice that sounded like I was Taking Back Sunday. And then in like the current crop of like rock artists a couple years ago, like I couldn't sing like Imagine Dragons if I wanted to. You know, like I just kind of who I am, and I've got this sort of weird vibe that doesn't really fit in sonically to what other people are doing. And that can be tough at times when you listen to everybody else and they all sound a certain way and you're like, well, it's weird that I'm different. And I think people are at their best when they embrace their differences. You know, you think of Freddie Mercury in the 70s, you know, in the beginning days of Queen, like there weren't like 24 Freddie Mercurys on the scene of people who were kind of like Freddie Mercury the way you have had scenes over the years. And it's a good thing to look around at his contemporaries and think, man, I should be doing more what they do. Otherwise, the world would have never gotten Freddie Mercury.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? You're absolutely right. I think that, especially nowadays, it's interesting how cool it is to be different. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure if I can ask, how old are you?
28.
You're 28. Okay. We're very young. I'm 30. I just turned 30. And correct me if I'm wrong, dude, but I don't know if you remember, but at least I remember growing up, especially in the 90s, and I remember how, like, it wasn't necessarily the cool thing to be the unique person. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't, and even to this day, I feel like it has its limits. But it's interesting that you use Freddie Mercury as an example, because as a musician myself, and as, you know, people, we tend to glamorize these stories, you know, where, you know, Freddie Mercury or whoever, you know, they fought tooth and nail to be themselves and be unique. And, you know, when you watch the movies or you read the bios, it sounds so glamorous and like this amazing thing, like, wow, they triumphed, they became their own thing, and now other people want to be Freddie Mercury. But I've always been the guy that wonders about, you know, how it feels like before you become Freddie Mercury, you know, because in the movies, they always fast track that, you know what I mean? Like the first couple years of them struggling, it's always like a 15-minute section. And then you see the big show, and then you see afterwards where they're like already famous, you know, kind of thing. And it's all bottled down to that 15-minute section, but it's fucking hard. It's really hard to look at yourself and be like, hey, I'm different. And I want to be this way, even though nobody gets what I'm doing, at least not yet. That is fucking hard to do that. I mean, I'm not sure if it's hard for you, but what do you feel?
Yeah.
Is it like incredibly hard?
It's definitely like a leap of faith and a bit of confidence that you have to have in yourself to look around at others and realize that what you're doing is not at all what they're doing, even if they have success, and that you just really believe in who you are and what you say to the world. And, you know, for all those people out there who feel that way, it's a tough realization that 99.9% of the time, like, you know, people aren't going to fuck with what you're saying. But it's 0.1% where when people do react to what you have to offer artistically, that we get some of the most iconic performers and songwriters of all time.
Yeah. Part of me wants to argue that when someone like you, and, you know, again, using Freddie Mercury as an example, but I'm putting you in the same category because you are very different, especially for the genres that you've been put in. I feel like it's a stretch because you definitely kind of cross very different genres and stuff. Mm. I'm kind of wondering, when it comes to being different and when it comes to being in an environment where people don't know how to classify you, but they know that you're good, but they just don't know how to peg you. where is the sense of joy for you? I'm not sure if you can remember, but in my opinion, when you're different like that and you're trying to do something different from everybody else, it is tough and it is hard to stay with it, but there is this sense of accomplishment and joy that comes from doing it your way. And I'm wondering for you, if you can remember, or even to this day, if you remember what it feels like to do, something for yourself when before anyone even noticed you, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I feel like it's one of those points that's important to talk about, because there's so many people out there trying to do their own thing, but they're expecting acceptance and this joy that comes from everyone applauding. But when you're trying to do your own thing, that's not going to happen for a while, at least, on most cases. So for you, what was it during that time where people didn't know how to classify you and you were just kind of doing your own thing? What was it that brought you joy? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I mean, just playing shows, about just doing what I do, knowing that it wasn't exactly what everybody else was doing, and just seeing people react to it and have a visceral emotional response to it. That for me is everything. That's the most validating thing you can ever have as a performer and as a recording artist.
Yeah. And when did you start feeling the tides starting to change? Because you are making some waves now. You are succeeding and you're doing a lot of really cool things. When was it that you started to notice, okay, what I'm doing is starting to work?
Well, I started to get some incredible love from Spotify, especially from Ali Hagendorf, about 6 months after I had sort of started this crazy journey. And there will be these little moments that feel like along anyone's career where they're like, wow, that was like a real moment. And that for me was one of the first ones. And then you kind of fast forward a year after that and being asked by the Rolling Stones to open up for them, who have a really long history of taking out artists who were like just a little different from everybody else. The Stones took out Prince in the early days and he got booed off the stage opening for them, and they took out Guns N' Roses and so many other incredible bands. And that for me was also like a real stamp of legitimacy. Not that you need it, not that I desire it, but it definitely was.
Yeah. And what was that like when it came to like opening up for the Rolling Stones? Was that one of the first opening slots that you had, or did you have a couple other ones before?
No, I had opened on a whole bunch of tours before for some amazing artists. But yeah, it was an incredible sensation, man. I'm just a guy sitting in his bedroom in New York City making records with about $200 worth of shitty equipment from 2010. And you get asked by somebody like Mick Jagger to open for them in a football stadium. It's a pretty surreal experience.
Damn, man. I'm wondering, when it comes to opening up for a lot of these legendary acts and fairly big names, when I guess the idea in my experience has always been, like the opening acts are kind of there to, get the people excited and stuff, but ultimately everyone is they're there for the headliner, usually, not always, but usually. In your experience, did you feel like you had to fight hard to capture people's attention when you opened up for some of these bands? Or was it different than that?
I feel like I always have to fight hard. So much of my story and my journey is defined by always having to overcome some really incredible odds and always having to prove yourself. Nothing's ever handed to you on a silver platter. It's like there are a lot of people out there in music who, started off knowing a lot of people and having a lot of connections and shit like that. And like, my grandfather was a milkman in Queens, so it's like I didn't grow up in a musical family. I didn't know a lot of people in music. So DES ROCS is really about like overcoming the odds and being who you are and just putting your nose down and doing good work. And that no matter the hand you're dealt, whether it's, trying to start a rock project in 2018 or overcoming the limitations of a virus that shut down the entire touring industry, to just keep going. And I hope people can kind of resonate with that message because it defines a lot of my music.
And I'm wondering, so you started opening up for all these major acts and people started noticing what you were doing. How did you keep that momentum going? Because you did a phenomenal job. Like, I feel like since I first heard of you, you've just kind of been, going up and up and up. And that is something that not everybody knows how to do well. I mean, there's so many people, again, not to point anybody out, but I do feel like, a couple years ago, 3-4 years ago, getting on a on a curated Spotify playlist was a little more I'm not gonna say more difficult. It was different, But now it's a very achievable goal. I mean, it's still very fucking hard, but it's achievable. But again, I've seen so many people achieve that milestone and then nothing happens afterwards. Obviously, everyone's journey is different. But you found a way to kind of, like a train, you just kind of went for it and just kept pushing through brick wall after brick wall. I'm wondering, how did you keep that momentum going? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, you just gotta knock them out night after night, and just prove yourself every night. Like, I don't feel like I'm entitled to shit. I feel like every night I gotta earn it. And I play every show like it's the last show I'll ever play in my entire life. And it'll be the same show to 8 people as it is to 80,000 opening for the Rolling Stones. And you need to just continue to do work and never rest on any sort of laurel or like artificial achievement that feels cool but really doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. Because, the only metric I have of success is just whether people have a real emotional response to my music. And if they do, that's great. That could be at a show or that could be on Spotify. And the more people you can reach, the better. But yeah, man, it's, I don't know, like I definitely appreciate that, but it's due to a lot of constant, pretty neurotic work and always wanting to just dream bigger and better than I did yesterday.
Yeah. Are you a workaholic?
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
Oh, absolutely. But I don't think that has a bad connotation to it. I think you can't launch an entire creative vision that's both visual and musical without putting in a lot of time. And you can't put in that lot of time without caring immensely about that vision and about every single detail.
Is there an example of, I feel like there is, but I agree with you. First of all, I believe that when it comes to launching something that's huge and major, there is so much fucking hard work that goes behind it. But, and this is kind of just like, I'm going to try and generalize again, but this is just kind of hearsay from what I've heard from, people that I know, managers, whatever. There are select people out there who are mainstream, who are successful, quote unquote, who are notoriously lazy, according to the stories from insiders,
Notoriously what, you said?
Notoriously lazy,
if
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by lazy, obviously that depends on who you are. Like, what does lazy mean? Does that mean that you like to play a video game here and there, or that you just don't do shit? I don't know. But I've heard many stories of people who have really just lucked out and they just like to chill. And then when the time comes, they'll perform or do whatever. And then afterwards, they're not worrying about it. And how they got successful is anybody's guess, But someone like you look at your life, you look at your career, you look at your resume, and it all makes sense. You're like, okay, this guy's putting in the work. He, every single night, he's trying to outdo what he did the next night. That makes sense. But what about the people that didn't do that and made it? There's a lot of artists nowadays, independent artists, who are really working hard to try and get there, who will, they get upset because it feels kind of hard when you're putting all this hard work and it doesn't work. And then someone who doesn't work nearly as half as hard as they do make it. Like, why do you think that happens? Obviously, it's chance, but I don't know. Sometimes there's more at play. You know what I mean?
I think there's just like, as far as artists who are kind of like regarded as lazy, like I don't know a lot of them in 2020. I think like you could be lazy in a different era of the music industry. But I really think that today, like, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I really truly believe that. I'm never going to be the best singer. I'm never going to be the best guitar player. I'm never going to be the best live performer of all time. I kind of like come to terms with that. You know what I mean? It's not about raw talent. Like, nobody went to a Bob Dylan show because they were just like so enamored with his like vocal prowess. You know what I mean? It's just the vibe and what you have to say to the world. And that could be literal, like in what you're literally saying through your songs, or it could be a much more vague artistic concept of like what you're saying just with your essence and your being and your art. So like people who are like, quote, lazy, it's like, I don't know, maybe that's part of their vibe. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's something to that that speaks to people and resonates with them. Um, but I think the quote, like lazy artist in the traditional sense of the word being lazy is a increasingly rare thing today.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with what you're saying, and I appreciate you clarifying that for me because that is true. I do feel like, when it comes to labeling someone as lazy, there's so much context that needs to be understood, and I guess kind of branching off from that, when it comes to you, because clearly from your personality, I know that you are a hard worker, and when you set your mind on something, it seems like nothing can really stop you from getting it, unless you want to stop doing it. No one's going to stop you. What do you feel, or what is it about you that audiences really like? Because again, people seem to be captivated by what you're doing and your music. And so, in your opinion, I'm not sure if you even have time or if you even spent time thinking about it, but I'm wondering, what do you feel and see that people like about what you do?
Hmm. That's like a really interesting question because I've literally never even thought about that before.
Yeah.
Like what do people dig about what I do? I can only guess in the sense that I'm just trying to take the biggest swing possible all the time. And I'm just trying
Mm.
to make the dopest shit that is moving music and culture forward. And I don't know, I think it also all comes back to a lot of what I was talking about before, but just like speaking to people on an emotional level and having music that hits them in some sort of way that's hard to describe.
Yeah. And on average, and obviously I imagine that it's different from song to song, but on average, what are some of the themes that you cover with your music?
I talk a lot about personal struggle. I talk a lot about overcoming the odds. I write a lot about darkness and battles with inner darkness and self-loathing of sorts. I talk a lot about identity. Music is tends to be lyrically very introspective, while musically being enormous and very, I guess, extroverted in a sense.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's okay if I ask this, but I imagine a lot of these themes, are they based off of personal experience?
Yeah, absolutely. My music is hyper personal. Sometimes I find it like a fun creative exercise to just kind of lose myself in a sort of fantasy land musically.
Yeah.
But it all is rooted in some sort of greater personal conquest at the end of the day.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about some of that music that you're trying to release. I'm not sure if you've already released it or if it's going to be coming out very soon, but I know that you've got an EP coming out, and I'm wondering, what are some of the experiences that led to some of this music that you're going to be putting out?
So I've got three new songs coming out on December 11th, and they're very reflective songs that I think encapsulate a lot of the struggles of the last 12 months or so personally, and everything that's
Mm.
leading to their release. I'm really excited for these to come out.
Yeah, I'm excited for you too. I know that we're getting close to 3 o'clock over there in New York, so we got to start cutting this very very soon. But part of me, if you don't mind me asking, and then I'll go ahead and start letting you go. When it comes to a lot of these personal struggles, because I feel like those are very important and they make who you are, and you are such a fascinating case for me. You are very much I don't know how to say it. You're kind of like an open book in the sense where I get you. Like I see you and I understand why you're succeeding and why everything is working out. But then I know that some of your music can be a little emotional, so to speak. Like not in the sense where it's like slow and there's a ballad and I'm crying. It's like just all you need is just listen it once and I can tell there's some stuff going on. I'm wondering, what is it comfortable for you to put some of your life story out there, I guess you can say? And I know it's through a song, so it's kind of different, but you're still opening up some of the stuff that you've gone through so that others can experience it, if you will. Have you always been comfortable, and are you currently comfortable doing that? And is that part of why a lot of audiences engage with what you're doing? If that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I also think that people can latch on to the struggles that I might face and ascribe them to things in their own lives and create their own meanings for those lyrics. You know, the lyrics, I don't get hyper literal with the way I talk about the things I talk about in my songs. So that leaves a lot of room when you tend to err on the side of poetic, which is more like my writing style. It leaves a lot of room for people to interpret things on their own. And I love that more than anything. Like, I don't want to ever tell people exactly what a song is about or exactly what I was feeling in that moment, because I want to leave it open and ambiguous the way some of my favorite art of all time is. Like, I have no idea what Another One Bites the Dust means. You know what I mean? And I'm happy I do.
I love that. That's actually a very good example. I don't know what that means,
Yeah.
but
Someone walking down a street and I don't know, but it's dope. You know?
yeah, no, I love that. That's a very good example.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate your honesty and I appreciate your outlook towards music and life and artistry. I think it's very unique and very refreshing the way that you do things, and it's very clear why it's working, and you are a very, very honest individual. So to kind of end things off, I know we already talked about your music and whatnot. What is something that you feel other artists can be doing to achieve what you're currently doing? So I know this show is listened to by a lot of independent artists who want to kind of be at a place where you're at. And so we've already talked about it, but in summary, I guess, what is the one thing that you feel has always helped you get to where you're currently at?
Be yourself, write what you know, and work tirelessly, because it's the things you do when nobody else is watching that are going to be the most important night after night. And really doing something great is, in my opinion, the combination of a lot of little things over a really long period of time.
I love that. Very well said. My man, DES ROCS, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on the show. It's been a refreshing talking to you. It's been very cool learning from you. You are very incredibly talented and super. I mean, I know I said down to earth, and I know you said that it's very different from who you are on stage, but regardless of that, man, you seem to have a lot of things figured out, and that's cool. That's a very cool thing and a very good position to be in, and it makes sense why it's working for you. And I would wish you luck, but I don't think you're going to need it. I think you've got everything you need, and you're going to make it, dude.
I appreciate it so much.